things that let's just address it before we get into some really specific questions about know your rights and how to actually really truly help. One of the things that we have seen, I know you have seen it, I have seen it, has been flying around, and that is just people are sharing these stories and they're sharing these memes, and a lot of the captions will say, abolish ICE. And I think you and I just need to be very clear about how we feel about that and what we think about that. So I'm going to let you start because it's such a fun question.
Yes.
And then I'll follow up behind you. But okay, what do we say? I mean, are we saying that we should abolish ICE?
Yeah, I think it's a great question. I will start with, I fully understand that sentiment of saying, if by what people mean by that is this is horrible and it shouldn't be happening, fully agree. And by this, I mean detaining refugees, splitting up families where there's no violation of any sort of criminal statute involved, taking people who entered the country lawfully and ripping them from their families. That shouldn't be happening. That is unjust. And in many cases, I think it is illegal. I mean, some of the illegal, depending on the specific circumstances, it's complicated. I would rather say, rather than saying abolish ICE, I would rather say reform ICE. Because it's very clear that the way things are functioning are not how they should function. I would also say I think ICE has way too much money right now. I mean, we were very much opposed at World Relief to the $75 billion that was given through the so-called One Big Beautiful Bill last summer to ICE, just for detention and operations. That doesn't include the money that Border Patrol got, and some of that money from Border Patrol we actually were advocating for. Although now it's also Border Patrol doing interior enforcement alongside ICE in Minnesota instead of being at the border. So I'm not sure. I think this is a situation where they have so much money, they don't know what to do with it, and they want to detain more people to fill up all the detention centers that they're building with all this money. And so they have to go well beyond people convicted of violent crimes, because there's just not that many of those people. According to the Cato Institute, as of like near the end of 2025, 5% of immigrants held in detention facilities have been convicted of a violent crime. We're not really complaining about those 5%. I think, again, we want people to have due process, but if you've committed a violent crime, you're a public safety threat, I think it's appropriate you'd be detained and eventually potentially be deported. It's the other 95% that we're concerned about, including now those who are lawfully present refugees. So where I get a little bit nervous with the language of abolish ICE is I think what people say by that is mostly this is evil and shouldn't be happening, and I agree. But what people will often understand, especially in a very different context where they're not experiencing the same thing on the ground, is there should be no enforcement of immigration laws. ICE stands for Immigration and Customs Enforcement. And I actually think we need immigration and customs enforcement, whether it's by an agency that is called ICE but we call it something else. I think there's a good argument that we maybe need to, go back to the drawing board and reconsider what this looks like, because we do want immigration and customs enforcement, but we want it to be done in ways that respects the rule of law, that respects the dignity of all human beings, that is looking out for the safety of Americans, particularly from that small share of immigrants who are potentially a public safety threat, who've committed serious crimes and have lost any privileges that they should have to be here. But simultaneously, that is looking out for both our legal and our moral obligations to those who have fled violence, who fled persecution in other parts of the world. And that is what is being mocked right now. So I personally wouldn't use that hashtag because I think it's misunderstood. I think that it sounds to people as don't have any immigration enforcement. And honestly, I think the impression, which I don't think was ever actually accurate, that there wasn't immigration enforcement in the last administration is somehow we got here. I think what we need is lawmakers and elected officials who can articulate we need smart immigration enforcement that uses as much taxpayer funding as is necessary to do what is appropriate, but not tens of billions of dollars more than that, to detain people who are legitimately a threat to public safety. And then we should find better alternatives under the law for someone whose only offense was to overstay a visa 30 years ago. Like that person is actually a threat to public safety. We're not affirming that it was good to overstay your visa, but there's legislation in the Congress right now, something called the Dignity Act, that would say, hey, you could pay a fine and over a number of years earn permanent legal status. We consistently find, including in a lot of evangelical churches, that's the sort of dynamic that people would prefer. Yes, get rid of people who've committed violent crimes, keep the borders as secure as possible, but also have functional legal processes for those who want to be reunited to family, to those who are fleeing a well-founded fear of persecution and are willing to go through that appropriate processes. And for the people who are undocumented, who have crossed the border unlawfully and have been here a long time and are working and paying taxes and haven't committed serious criminal offenses, they should have the opportunity to make things right. Again, we're not saying amnesty that ignores the law, but there could be a better alternative than giving an incredible amount of money to ICE or any other federal agency, and then having them detain those who are undocumented, and while they're at it, people who are lawfully present, and even significantly a number of U.S. citizens, even if, for short periods of time perhaps, but lots of citizens are getting detained in Minnesota right now as well through this very broad brush attempt at immigration enforcement.
Yeah. Yeah. So I think that phrase, abolish ICE, is unhelpful in general, because I don't know of anybody who doesn't want good quality enforcement of the law. So of course you want that. I mean, I've got family who is in law enforcement. I know that you have friends that are in law enforcement. So we've always said before the interior became kind of chaos, we were always saying safe and secure borders, thorough vetting, but we also wanted the humane treatment of people who we believe are made in the image and likeness of God. And what we are seeing and what we are knowing from our friends and hearing from clients and people on the ground that have been resettled, not because of things we're seeing online, but because of people that we are in relationship with, we know that there is unjust and cruel and inhumane ways in which immigrants and refugees are being treated. And so this, in our opinion, goes beyond enforcement. It's now like we've kind of crossed a threshold of, it used to be like enforcement, and then it was like cruelty of enforcement. And now I feel like we have, just even in the last several days, crossed some kind of threshold where it's turned into a violent, unchecked enforcement. And that is what is concerning. So I understand the vitriol, like abolish ICE. What I think, like you said, that gets misunderstood to, we don't want enforcement. And we are saying that we want immigration enforcement, but it must be humane, and it must be just, and it must be smart, and actually uphold really American values and also moral values, human values. And so that's kind of the rub that we have in that saying. And I hope that clears some things up for some folks as to why we're not calling for that and why we feel like that's not the best use of kind of your energy in this moment. So, all right, let's